Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming to listen to HubStore today. You're attending the webinar that asks the question, overpaying on vSphere backup? And if you are, we can answer with a possible solution there, which would have you start thinking about cloud backup as a service. So I'm just going to go over briefly what we'll be covering in the presentation today. First, we're going to talk about virtual machine backup and what are some of the challenges that people encounter when they're running with that. This may not be brand new to all of you, about what is backup as a service, but I'm going to review that briefly just in case. And then we're going to talk about why you might want to choose backup as a service for your virtual machine backup. You'll then get a demonstration of HubStore's backup as a service platform, and then we'll have some time to take questions at the end. If you have questions during the presentation, if you look at your go to webinar control panel, you should see that one of the tabs you see is questions. Feel free to open that up and you can type in questions, and then we'll make sure that your questions get asked at the end. But before I go any further, let me introduce our speakers. So we're going to have Sal introduce himself.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Sal. I work as a senior sales engineer over here at HubStore. Really looking forward today to the presentation and doing the demo for you. So that's why I've been asked to jump on today's webinar. Myself, I've had over a decade of experience in the backup and disaster recovery world. So again, thank you very much, and looking forward to speaking to you later on in the demo. Thank you, Dave.
And my name is Dave Henry. I'm HubStore's product marketing manager. I have been working in IT since the early parts of 1997. I've been in a lot of different data centers and I've worked on multiple cloud platforms. And I have arrived at the marketing team through the technical route. So it was a little unusual career path, but it seems to be working. So let me dive into our topic right here. So based on surveys we see, based on best practices out there, and based on feedback we receive from our own customers, there are 5 key things that people are looking for when they're looking at a backup solution for virtual machines. They want it to be something that can install and get deployed, get implemented very quickly, very easily. They don't want it to take a lot of time. You want a fast recovery. You're not backing things up just for the fun of backing things up. Instead, you're backing things up so that if the need ever arises, you can recover that data. So especially if you might have to recover a machine that's live in production, you want to know that you can get that recovery very quickly and have a very low recovery time objective, or RTO. The third thing that everybody's looking for is, of course, lower cost. Everybody's looking for lower cost everywhere, especially across the data center. So you want a low cost VM backup solution. They're looking for something that's easy to use, that won't take admins a lot of time to manage, to monitor the backups. Surveys show that anywhere between 70 and 80% of IT admins feel that the vast majority of their time is spent on just keeping things running as is, just maintaining the status quo. And if we can do anything to cut down the amount of time you spend on that, you can actually free up some time so that you can do the new projects. And with all of that, data center space is becoming a premium. So you're looking for a solution that will have as small a data center footprint as possible. So what we see from a lot of non-backup as a service backup or legacy, some of the incumbent solutions, basic setup, you can see starts in primary data center. You have your environment over here on the left. You're running a dedicated server that runs the backup software. And then it's either sending things to some secondary storage. So you're writing from disk to get that speed advantage. And then from that disk to something like a virtual tape library. You may be writing from the software directly to a virtual tape library. And then in the end there, in order to make sure you can sleep easy at night, you're going to replicate all that data to a secondary data center. Now that data center might be one of your own, or it might be a co-location site that you're renting space on. Now, if some of you may see that, as a second step here, that you'll actually be moving things from storage to tape, and then your means of replicating things to another site is to ship those tapes off to someone else's site, where they can hold them for you in vaults and keep them safe and in the right environmental conditions. So again, you're looking to ensure that you don't have just that one copy on site. You want to make sure there's a second copy in case something happens. So what challenges do you run into with virtual machine backup? A lot of the larger, older solutions are sort of like letting the rhinoceros go in your data center. They're big and they're clunky. They can't turn corners quickly. They're not agile at all. And sometimes they're very difficult to use. Your recovery times with a lot of these legacy solutions are just too long, especially if you had to go to the tape backup and it's going to take you time to get it shipped back from wherever it is. That's not the type of delay that, if you're paying the most expensive support contract, that might be a 4-hour SLA. 4 hours to have one of your production systems down is just unacceptable in 2020. They tend to be really expensive, and nobody wants that. They're often very complicated because in addition to giving you that interface for VM backup, they might back up a whole bunch of other things and try to put it in one single pane of glass. They'll talk to you about that. And that can just make things cluttered and confusing in the interface, because if you're trying to back up your virtual machines, that's the only thing you want to do at that moment. And of course, with that dedicated server or dedicated virtual tape or actual tape library, you're just taking up too much data center space. So that's cutting into your space rental, that's cutting into your increasing your power costs and cooling costs, and which then ties into part of one of the things that contributes to being a really expensive solution. Now, backup as a service, on the other hand, is not installing a backup solution on site. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You receive a service that does the backups for you. So you're going to do this as a monthly subscription to backup service. So you'll pay per month to know that this month their backups will be done. The pricing is going to be based on pay as you go, based on how much data you're backing up and storing to the cloud. So if you have a month where you don't have as many data changes as you have in other months, you are going to have a smaller bill that month. It's something where, HubStore's backup as a service, you set and control your backup schedule, you control your backup policies, and HubStore will perform the backups for you on the schedule you want automatically. It's basically set and forget. You will not need to do anything else to have things happen once it's set up. Now, backup best practices and our experience with customers tells us that we recommend what we're calling a local cache. So this would be a local copy of the data that you keep in your data center, you keep on site. That would become your recovery point of first resort, because you know that moving the data from one side of your data center to the other, or from one rack to the other, is going to be a lot quicker than restoring from the cloud. So you can use local disk, you can use NAS as that local cache target. And with HubStore, you can set retention times based on what works best for you. So if things are turning over very quickly in your environment, maybe you only need to keep the last 7 days, last week's worth of backup data. Some people feel safer if they keep the last 30 days. You get to choose, and you can change it later if what you chose isn't actually working for you. So here's the architecture when we look at backup as a service. So you have your virtual environment here. You subscribe to the HubStore backup service. If you've chosen the local cache option, and again, we in best practices would recommend that, the data as it's backed up is written to your local cache as well as uploaded to be stored in the HubStore cloud, where you have the benefits of encryption, and it's stored immutably. So you know that the data is not going to change from the moment you've stored it. And then in order to make you extra safe, you can have replication to another set of cloud storage in a completely different region. So if there's some widespread disaster like a hurricane, something like that, that can, takes out all the power in a large area, great. You still have a backup copy stored someplace where things are still running. Now, one of the best practices for backup in general is what we call the 3-2-1 rule. And so with that, what they mean is you want to have at least 3 copies of your data. So you're going to have 1 copy on site, your second copy will be up in the cloud, and then your third copy is in some other region of the cloud. These should all be identical to each other. So you want to have at least 3 copies. You want them to be in at least 2 different locations. So great, we've got them in 3 here in this diagram, but even if you didn't choose that replication, you'd still have them in 2 because you'd have 1 on site and 1 in the cloud. And then the 1 is that 1 copy of the 1 data set. So here what I'm showing is 1, 2, and 3. There's the 3 different copies. They are all byte for byte identical to each other. So that if for whatever reason I'm unable to get the backup from do a restore from the local copy, I know that I'll be getting the same data from the cloud that I would have gotten from the local copy. So in particular, HubStore has built our backup as a service solution to work with virtual machines. Virtual machine environment is very different than a physical server environment, despite the fact that your users shouldn't be able to tell the difference. From the admin side, it's very different because you have the ability to create and destroy virtual machines multiple times throughout the day. So you may be, your environment can get very complicated very quickly. So one of the things we do for this is the HubStore backup for virtual machines is an agentless backup. So you don't have to worry about installing backup software on each and every VM in your environment. And now because that agent isn't running on the virtual machine has full use of all the resources you've given it. And so the backup, when it's being run, will have no impact on the performance of any of your virtual machines. So we let you define backup policies at multiple levels. You can set policies on a per VM basis if you've got a couple VMs that are performing some sort of special service, or if you're doing software development, you might want to have your code repository backed up every hour, but other stuff backed up once a day, twice a day. You can back up on the individual based on the physical host, on the entire virtual cluster, or at the virtual data center level. Now, with these policies, if you have them at one of the higher levels, like data center, cluster, or host, it will auto-discover any new virtual machines that have been created since the last time the backup ran, and they will inherit the backup policy of the next highest up definition. So when you create a brand new VM, you do not need to add it to your backup solution. HubStore's backup as a service is going to find it and apply the backup policies you've set for that cluster, and you don't have to worry about any VMs being unprotected because any new ones will automatically be covered for you. So when people talk about using, getting backup service from someone else, a lot of people are concerned that they might lose control because someone else is doing things for them. Well, the way we have things set up is you control the when and how of the backups, and HubStore will do them for you. You set the schedule for any full backups, any incremental backups you want. You can set particular schedules so that you're staggering the backups so they're not all running at the same time. Maybe you want to do that to save bandwidth, maybe because that works better for the workflow that you're using. If you're concerned about security, and everyone should be these days, you can choose to encrypt things. You can encrypt the data in flight. So while it's going from your site to the cloud, it can be fully encrypted. So even if anyone captures that data stream, they're not able to read it. And the data can be stored with data at rest encryption, so that even if someone were able to get into that blob storage, which is incredibly unlikely, but even if they were, it wouldn't do them any good because they wouldn't be able to read the data that they were able to find. You have complete control over your data retention settings, how long those backup sets, how long those data copies are going to stay around and be kept for. You have control of data tiering for your backup. So let me talk about tiering for a second. So this gives you like your backups on your terms. You get complete control, and you can set things up to help drive down cost in the way that works best for you. So you can see here we're giving examples of 3 different tiers. And the hot tier is where you put your data that's most frequently accessed. Maybe this is, your live databases that are running right now, or the servers that are running the applications you use day to day. The cool tier is where you're going to put backup data, but it's backup data that you still want readily available. It's last night's backup. It's yesterday's backup. The things that you might need to get quickly, you still want it stored, but you want it quick and ready for restart. And then the archive tier is, we call it cold storage because that's where you're just putting things away just in case. It's very rare that someone will come and ask for a restore of that particular VM from 6 months ago. But admins and companies sleep easier knowing that if they had that request, they'd be able to provide it. So you can set up automatic policies, so based on time, so that your data will start out on a hot tier, and eventually, as it grows older and hasn't been accessed, it can be automatically migrated down to the archive tier. To sum up the difference between tiers, the warmer you get on the tier, the faster it's going to be, the lower latency, so you'll have the fastest response. The cooler you get on the tiers, you'll get lower cost per gigabyte. So this will allow you to do some good setup to make sure you're controlling what you're going to be billed for. You can make sure that you're saving as much money as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sal now so that he can give you a live backup of our actual HubStore backup interface, so that you can see what it might be like to back up virtual machines using it. And there we go. All right, Sal.
All right, thank you, Dave. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and let's jump right in. I'm going to go here and share my window, and we're going to jump straight into the virtualized environment, so HubStore backup service. So you can see when I'm going ahead and setting up the backup service, the idea here is that everything is driven through policies, through inheritance, through the setup of multiple machines or individual machines as part of the HubStore backup service. So as part of today's demo, we're going to quickly look at some of the settings that are most important to setting up a backup system. And then on top of that, we are going to go run through a demo of a restore. All right, so when setting up the HubStore backup service, we're simply, we had noted in one of the slides earlier, David noted that, easy to deploy and deployment within, 15, 20 minutes. And that's essentially what this is. You have the information for the backend data to the cloud. The only thing you really need to do is decide from a policy perspective, what gets backed up, how often do I want that scheduled from a backup frequency perspective, and also with regards to my retentions, how I want those retentions to be kept. Now, one of the things that David also mentioned was the ability to set up a local cache. And a local cache is essentially your local copy of your data, generally on the same LAN. So I have the ability to do LAN speed backup, and most importantly, the ability to do LAN speed restore. So that would be for your most active data, in the sense that you can turn around and say, keep a local copy retention for 30 days, or in this case here, I'm saying for 7 days, keep a local copy. In the meantime, on the back end, any other data that needs to be kept for a longer retention period will also be replicated off to the cloud. Now, to set up a local cache, it really is simple. It's simply storage. There's no compute involved in that process. You simply give it a target location with regards to a path. And once you have that set up, the data will then target that local path and then on its way to be replicated to the cloud itself. Now, there's a whole host of different settings here to make sure you're on top of your backups, any backups that are unprotected, any VMs that are unprotected, any errors, notifications, etc. All that information here is set up as well with regards to those notifications. So I can set up the frequency as notifications, errors, warnings, etc. They've also mentioned tiering. Right, so tiering is a very important part to building a solution on your terms. So deciding where I want to keep my data in terms of hot tier, that cool tier, and that very coldest tier, the archive tier itself. Now, if we look into our demo environment here, you can see we have a number of VMs that are available. And if I go ahead and click on one of those VMs as part of what we have in the demo environment, you're going to see I'm protecting this system here. And I can also see with regards to a log, all my backups that have completed, any restores, all that information is available. If I double click on that, I get a little more information. You can see these are all running successfully. However, if a backup were to fail or there are any errors, I would get some additional information there so I understand what is going on. Now, from a backup perspective itself, you can see that I have a number of backup sets set by date. And if we go ahead and we expand any one of these dates, you can see that I've got a full backup running at the end of the day. But every hour on the hour, I'm running an incremental. So at this point, in order to run a restore, it's very simple. I simply select the restore point in time that I want to recover back to. And let's go for our last known full backup, which is yesterday. That's what I want to restore. I simply go ahead, I click, right click that particular backup and hit the restore button. When I select the restore button, I'm presented with a number of steps as part of the restore wizard. So from the perspective of restores itself, we have the ability to drop down the VMDK as a flat file. So there's certain advantages to doing so. If I want to parse that VMDK for individual files, folders, etc. Again, I can drop that down as a flat file VMDK, or I can choose in an active state to restore back to my virtual environment. Let's go ahead and run with that use case. So now I'm presented with three different options here: the ability to restore back to the original VM, the ability to restore back to a specific VM. So in my virtual environment, if I have a target VM that I want to specify and restore back to that VM, I can certainly do that. The most common option is being able to restore back to a new VM. So in this instance here, it'll go ahead, it'll create that VM with the new name I'm giving it here, and allow that restore to occur. And at that point, I can then go ahead and map my disks. And once I've mapped my disks, I will then be able to power on that VM and work with it and essentially completing my restore. So in this case here, let's go ahead and let's create a system called webinar demo. It's going back to my VMware instance. At this point, I'm running through the virtualized entities here with regards to my folder name. So in this case here, we have a sales folder. I'm going to go ahead and drop it into my sales folder. We select the resource pool. You can see here, everything is sort of driven by a wizard. And I simply go in, and again, I want to take that and select my sales resource pool. From a host perspective, I've got a single host here in my environment. There's multiple hosts, they would be listed out. Go ahead and select my individual host, and then finally my data store. I have the single data store in this case here. And at this point here, I'm actually going to go ahead and kick off this restore. And when I do so, there's just one final step. As you can see here, it's creating that virtualized environment for me. It's restoring that machine. And all I simply need to do now is map the virtual drive map pins on the back end, hit finish, and that process has been completed and has been successfully started here. All right, so if we jump into our virtual environment, you're going to now be able to see in real time that it went ahead and created that virtual machine. That's actually has been completed now. It's copying the virtual machine configuration as we speak. And there's my machine there, the webinar demo. At this point, once this is completed, the virtual machine configuration, I can then go ahead and power on that machine. And that's my restore completed. So the idea here, keep it easy, keep it quick. That is a general overview of the demo. We have a Q&A period at the end of the session. Any questions you have for me, please feel free to ask. Thank you, Dave, and I'm going to hand it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Sal. I hope all of you found Sal's demo as informative and interesting as I did. I think it gives you a real good sense of how easy it is to set up those backups and how easy it is and fast it is to do the restores. So to look a little more at the larger picture of HubStore's platform solution, what you're getting is we're running everything as software as a service. You're getting a converged backup and archive solution. Everything runs in the cloud, so it's a platform as a service native, and it's fully managed. If something goes wrong with you don't have to worry about the backup server being down and you being woken up in the middle of the night to take care of it. If something happens, we take care of it. And your subscription gives you access to the full connector suite that we offer. So you could use it to back up Windows, you could back up Linux, you could back up your Office 365 environment, you could back up, like we've been talking about, your VMware VMs, but it could also back up Hyper-V VMs or even ones running on Azure instances. Plus, we have connectors that will allow you to work with all of the services you see here. So what comes with that is you're going to get the full security. You're going to get search capabilities so that you can search that archive looking for the particular things you want. We do some context indexing. You can run analytics so that you can see how much did my data change when, or whatever other information in your backups. We do have a software developers kit. So if you have some sort of special situation going on, or you want to try and integrate our solution to be the back end for the way you do your backups, we give you that. There's an open API that works with that as well. You'll get the policy set. You get worm, which means that, write once, read many. So when you write that backup to the HubStore cloud, it cannot be overwritten, cannot be deleted, and it cannot be changed. And because you have access to the change the retention policies and do that search, should you be called for any reason to do some sort of discovery, you can do that. You can run it down to whatever level you want. Someone could do a search for any PowerPoints created by Dave earlier than 6 months ago. And then you could find all of those directly through the search capabilities. And then you could make sure those stay locked and get exceptions in your retention policies so they don't get deleted until you remove that legal hold. The pricing structure for HubStore's backup as a service, it's very simple, it's linear, it's very straightforward. The first thing is that we calculate the storage cost based on us compressing the data that you've moved into the cloud before we store it. So you're going to get some reduction in cost there as a reduction in space used. On our cool tier, it's $3 per gigabyte per month. Now on the archive tier, it's 0.3 cents of per gigabyte per month. So let's say, for example, we have customers who are saving a lot of data. So we had a customer who's looking at 300 terabytes of data that they need backed up and stored with the different copies being saved in the retention. Well, if you can see here, it's not a grid line, but if we just followed across here, so 300 terabytes would be a cost of about $9,000 a month. Well, our sales engineers talked with the customer, and the customer estimated that about 80% of their data hadn't been touched in the last 30 days. So they decided they wanted to play things a little more conservatively. So they said, hey, you know what? We're only going to back up things a little later. So they ended up archiving 2/3 of their data. So that was 200 terabytes that got moved to the archive tier. So that's 200 terabytes on the archive tier. That looks to me like it's just a little bit less than $1,000 a month. And that left them 100 terabytes at the cool tier, which comes in at about $3,000 a month. So you'd be looking at a bill of maybe $4,000 a month if you use the tiering. If you keep everything, all those 300 terabytes on the cool tier instead, where you get faster access, it would cost about $9,000 a month. So once we were able to, show the customer through a pricing calculator how much savings they could have if they started archiving some of the data, they adopted a policy to do that immediately. They were very happy with the savings that they saw. So just to kind of touch on some of the points we've brought up throughout here, comparing HubStore's backup as a service for VM backup to some of the other backup solutions that you might have on site. Yeah, we provide a simple architecture to run that backup as a service. Our pricing is easy to understand. It's very clear and straightforward, and it's very inexpensive. You are not locked into us for life. It's a pay-as-you-go subscription. You don't have to sign up for anything more than month to month if you don't want to. You can, sign a longer contract if you want, but ultimately we can do just pay as you go. So again, the bill is going to be based on how much data you have backed up and stored in the cloud. So you don't have to worry about the pricing changes there. You're going to only pay for the cloud services you're actually using. Built into our architecture is the best practice for backups of that 3-2-1 rule. At least 3 copies in at least 2 different locations of that same one data set. Our GUI is very intuitive for monitoring backup jobs and management. You saw it in the demo there, how quick and easy it was for Sal to run through that. And it's got everything you need laid out simply and clearly. And it's got wizards built in so that you don't need to work out all the details. You could just, it will offer you to select the choices you need. And the basic platform we have can extend to do backups for your full Office 365. You can do content archiving, tiering, compliance, that you can do that search. All of these things can be available to you through our backup as a service. So if you've been very interested in what you see and you want to know more, there's a couple different ways you could do that. I'll just let you know now that you will be receiving a copy of this presentation. So that copy will have these all as clickable links, so you don't have to worry about scribbling anything down. So you could start now. If you've got a small environment or if you just want to test things on your test environment, you can go to the HubStore website, give it a credit card, and 20, 30 minutes from now, you could have your data protected through our cloud backup. You could look at a dedicated instance. So that would be an isolated tenant where you're keeping your storage separate from everyone else. You have a subscription agreement and you're getting billed by invoices instead of by subscription. We can do that, that's a little more complicated than the setup you were shown here, but it's just the setup part really that's more complicated. So if you're interested in that, you can click here to schedule a demo with one of our sales engineers. Maybe you'll be lucky enough to get Sal. And if you're not sure, you want more information, but you're not really sure if it would work in your environment or how you might want to proceed, or you're looking for help trying to figure out what would be the right tiering policies for your business, great. You can just reach out and someone on our sales team will get back to you and we can set up an appointment and a meeting with you. In addition, if you look at your GoToWebinar control panel right now, you should see that one of the tabs there is named Handouts. If you go there, you'll be able to download the data sheet for the HubStore VM backup solution. So if you need more information to bring back, It should be available for you there. So at this point, we're going to look at any questions you have. So again, if you have questions, you can go to that question tab and write it in. You can still put in new questions now. You haven't been cut off yet. So I'm just going to read some of what we're seeing so far. So Sal, we have a question about scaling. Like, we have a large environment. How big can this solution scale to?
Yeah, and great question. You know, with regards to some of the examples you showed, and I know I've worked with customers out there, that there is no ceiling in the sense of, you know, how much data we can back up. I've worked with customers that are over 250 terabytes in size. So this really is an enterprise type solution. Now, there is the ability to set up multiple hub store backup services, so that would scale as required. But even in a very large environment, I've only had to set up the one instance of the hub store backup services in order to protect that environment. So it scales well. It's easy to scale if that's the requirement, but most importantly, easy to use. And I think when you have a large environment, that's the most important thing. One thing that you had mentioned, Dave, is, you know, if I introduce new VMs into the environment, do I need to jump into the hub store backup service and add those? I mean, that would be an administrative nightmare. We have policy set up, so new machines that are introduced are automatically added to the backup. If I want to exclude those, I can certainly do so as well. Again, everything driven by that policy-based system.
Excellent, thank you. So we have a question from the chat here. I'll read it out first. You mentioned worm. Does that mean all data that is backed as worm cannot be deleted, even if I want to set up a retention policy and delete the oldest backups? So in this case, what we meant by not deleting with worm is that it's set up, it's stored as an object blob in cloud storage. That blob cannot be deleted until the retention policy, the date that was set by the retention policy, expires. And with that retention policy, HubStore will take care of the cleanup for you, deleting things that have outlived their usefulness, outlived their retention policy time. So you don't have to worry about that at all. But it means until that retention date has come, you can't even accidentally delete a copy, even if if you're like me and clumsy on the keyboard sometimes. You don't have to worry about accidentally deleting anything, and you don't have to worry about someone else, maliciously deleting any of your backups. It stays there. It's completely immutable until that retention period has passed, and that's something you can set. So again, for whatever works for you, you could set up separately for different types of backups. Maybe I want to retain, my Office 365 data for, 6 months, but I only need to retain the backups of my virtual machines for 3 months. So you can set that up, and you'll be very flexible as you go. So that was a great question. Thank you. I'm glad you asked. Sal, I have another question for you here. You mentioned the suite of connectors. Can you explain what a connector is exactly?
Yeah, certainly, Dave. So today's presentation has been mainly focused on the VM backup demo, but as you had presented as part of your slides, we have the ability to do Office 365 files, for example. So all those different items that I'm targeting, we have connectors for those. So that's when we use the word connector services, that's essentially what we're alluding to. So I would select the individual connector. So if it's a files workload or an Office 365 workload, I would select the appropriate connector. Now, the connector services actually run on a Windows-based system. So that's the only real requirement for the connector services. Once I have and that can be anywhere within the environment itself. But once I have that, think agentless, it's going to go out there, it's going to crawl the different locations and run those backups accordingly, depending on, again, the type of connector being used. But ultimately, when we say connector, it's exactly that, connector for box files, for Slack, for, everything Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange Online, etc.
So Sal, a follow-up question I'm seeing related to that is, where does the management console, where is it installed? Where does it actually live? As you talked about the connector service, does that need to be installed on a dedicated server in the data center, or are there other options?
Yeah, no, great question. So let's tackle the first question first, the admin console. So the admin console, much like we showed you the HubStore backup service, is easy to use, but it is web-based. So it is a single pane of glass, and from that admin console, I can set up my security. I can set up my various users. Now we do have Active Directory sync as well, so we can pull all that information from your environment down to ensure that permissions and ACLs are kept. And then from the admin GUI as well, I can set up my analytics, I can set up my policies, my tiering, my deletion policies themselves, and also run my searches. So we have the ability to do content searching across the backup data. So, when we're backing up that data, let's say it's at the file level, we're also wrapping that data up with all the metadata that has information, data about the data itself. So with that, because we are exposing that to our back end, that really allows that user to run content searching, and that can be done at an end user level as well. So your end users can go in, have a look at their backup sets, their versioning of their files, and essentially do a self-service through granular lookup and using hotkeys, etc., in terms of searching for data. So there's a lot of granularity there, some really powerful features when we talk about the admin GUI itself.
Thank you, Sal. We've got one last question, and it's a question that has to do with data sovereignty. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with it, data sovereignty is some nations have laws that say if you're doing business inside our country, the data needs to be stored inside our country too. And so if you have concerns about that, can we still work with that? The answer is yes. We can work with you to ensure that your data is backed up to the data center that's in the region that still meets your data sovereignty needs. And we have some customers who are multinational with different divisions. And so they may have one division that's in a country that has data sovereignty laws and another division in a country that doesn't. Great. We set up the backups policy separately for that one division and to make sure all that data is still stored in that region within the walls of that country. And then within the borders, I probably should have said, within the borders of that country, to make sure everything's legal and in compliance. And then the other divisions do not necessarily need to have that. The part of the point of the cloud is, when I look to access my data, I get it. I shouldn't need to worry about where it actually is coming from. Now, again, some security cases, some compliance, they are very concerned with where it is. And great, we can help you work with that as well. So with that, I would love to thank you all for taking the time. I know everybody's busy these days, so we appreciate the time you spent with us. Just as a reminder, you will get email that will give you a link to the presentation that we used today, and it will also give you a link to the recording we've done of this presentation in case you want to share it with someone, or if you want to review any points that came up in here. And all of those things for next steps, if you're interested in learning more, you'll get clickable links to that in the copy of the presentation. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time and have a great rest of your day.